Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Today on Thinking to Infinity, we have something a little bit different. Today, I have a guest that I'm interviewing, and he is, as I've described in one of my previous videos that you might have watched, a hero of mine in the apologetic space. I first saw today's guest when he was the speaker at a local church, and he presented a unique approach to evangelism that I personally had never heard before, which is the focus of his book, Tactics. So I got the book, and it was life-changing for me. I started listening to his radio show, which is now the Stand to Reason podcast. I was amazed at how deftly he was able to respond to critics and answer a lot of Christians' deepest questions. And ultimately, I thought, I want to be able to think like this guy. So I kept on listening and reading and learning, and I've been following his ministry, Stand to Reason, for over 13 years now. He was my top choice for my first interview here on this channel. He's debated famous atheists and critics of Christianity. He has master's degrees in philosophy of religion and ethics and Christian apologetics. He's an award-winning, best-selling author of the books The Story of Reality, Relativism, Feet Planted Firmly in Midair, and Tactics, which is a personal favorite of mine. I've bought more copies of Tactics than any other book because I tend to give a lot of them away. And if you know me well, you probably have a copy. And I tell people, once you're a Christian, you need a good Bible. And then after that, it's probably a good idea to grab Mere Christianity and a copy of Tactics, and then you're good to start your journey. So without further ado, my guest today, Greg Koukl. Hi, Greg.
Hey, Gregory. It's good to talk to you again. We got together in Albuquerque a couple of months ago, and that was fabulous. And thank you for selling so many books for me. That's great.
I do my best.
I appreciate that. It's good to chat with you today.
Good to chat with you as well. Thanks so much. And speaking of books, you have a new one that just released a little bit under a month ago, I believe, September 12th, Street
right.
Smarts.
Right.
And so I've been able to go through it. It's another fascinating work, but in your own words, could you give us just a brief synopsis, an overview of what Street Smarts is all about?
Sure. The street is any place you feel uncomfortable. I live in LA, and so South Central is not too far away. So you don't wander out to South Central. You don't drive through South Central. You don't fly over South Central. It's dangerous, But for a lot of people, the spiritual street is dangerous for them too. They feel uncomfortable, vulnerable when they have conversations of a spiritual kind with their friends or with students, professors, even family members. And so consequently, they stay off the street, spiritually speaking. And that's the place where Christ has sent us out into in order to make a difference. And the reason that they stay off the street is because they're a bit scared, and I understand that. The apostles were scared. We see Jesus saying in Matthew 10, before he sends them out on their first short-term missionary journey, do not fear, 3 different times in 7 sentences. Paul, believe it or not, was scared. Read about that in Acts chapter 18. He's in Corinth, and Jesus appears to him and says, don't be afraid any longer, right? So it's not unusual when we face a hard situation like we do in our culture now to be a little bit ambivalent about embracing it going out in the street. However, I often ask people, how many people like to take a test? And most people don't. Unless they know the answers, right? The answers, no problem at all. And the same thing, you go out in the street, if you're an MMA fighter, if you're carrying a weapon or something like that, you can handle yourself, you're protected. So the same thing here. I wrote the book Street Smarts, kind of a sequel to Tactics, which you mentioned you liked so well. And there's 3 steps in the game plan, and Tactics, we'll get into that a little bit probably in our conversation. But for those who have read Tactics, the Street Smarts is like the 3rd step on steroids. So it's meant to deal with all of the really challenging issues that we face now in our culture, and there's a lot of them. Whether it's atheism, I got 2 chapters on atheism, whether it's the Bible, challenges to the Bible, things in the Bible that are discomforting for people. There's 2 chapters on Bible and science. I have 2 chapters on dealing with Jesus. Jesus is the only way of salvation. Jesus is the Son of God. I have 2 chapters dealing with abortion. I have a chapter dealing on ethics and morality. I have chapters on gender and marriage and sex. And so all of the things that Christians might encounter, I've put together chapters in Street Smarts to help them get a background understanding of the issue. But at the same time, Gregory, to have the ability to employ the tactical game plan in those circumstances, which, as you know, uses questions to make the case. And that's why Street Smarts is subtitled Using Questions to Answer Christianity's Toughest Challenges. So that's kind of a brief overview of a tool that will get them into play. And we can talk about this more too, not, and this will sound strange, but not to lead people to Christ. Huh? Isn't evangelism about leading people to Christ? Well, evangelism is about making a difference in somebody's life so that they come to Christ. But when we think about leading people to Christ, I think what most people think about is helping people to make a decision for Jesus. So the end game is to pray with them to receive Christ as Lord and Savior, or having them come forward in an altar call or something like that. And my approach is a little different, because I think that step largely takes care of itself. We can talk more about that as well. My approach is what do you do before that? And there's a lot of things that are happening in the lives of people who have become Christians that happened before they became Christians that were central to that. There was a lot of what I call gardening going on in their life before there was a harvest. So the gardening to me is critical. Street Smarts is about gardening, engaging people in a thoughtful, gracious way, using questions to then address the challenges that they experience. And it may be a certain thrust basically at their own view that Street Smarts will help them to parry, or it may be an alternate point of view, say atheism or the pro-choice view or a whole bunch of other things that somebody else believes instead of Christianity. And the goal here is to help, in that case, to help them see the flaw in their point of view, and all the while using questions as a shrewd way of navigating the conversation so they stay friendly but effective.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great approach, and it's something that not everybody puts forward. I grew up in some youth groups that were very well-meaning, but they kind of gave the impression that if you weren't standing up on the lunchroom table and shouting at the top of your lungs for people to come to the cross, that you were kind of a disappointment to Jesus, you know?
Right.
And I'm guessing you've been doing this for a while now, and I'm guessing you might not have run into too many people who say that that's their testimony story of somebody, just accosted them.
I'll tell you something really interesting, Gregory. And of course, this hadn't happened when we talked last in Albuquerque, but in the last, say, 2.5 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks since the book has come out, and I've been doing a lot of talks on this, I have been taking a poll among the audiences, because I talk about gardening, and I tell people, essentially I'm saying, don't worry about the harvest. Don't worry about swinging for the fences. Don't worry about getting people to sign on the dotted line as a Christian, okay? My conviction is that's going to happen pretty naturally, all right? The harvest kind of takes care of itself. The hard work really is in the gardening, the preparation before the harvest. And frankly, you won't have a harvest unless you've had a season of good gardening beforehand. And therefore, if that's the case, then the hard work is in the gardening and not in the harvesting. But it's the harvesting that is discomforting for Christians, because they think they have to challenge somebody to receive Christ as Lord and Savior. This is the way we characterize it. So the poll I've been taking is this. I asked my Christian audiences who I'm talking about Street Smarts with, how many people who are Christians did not become Christian by coming forward at an altar call or by praying with someone to receive Christ as Lord and Savior? Kind of the standard motif we think of in evangelism and bringing them to Christ. How many people did not? And I'm telling you, I was stunned by the response that I've seen in audiences, because the average, I would say, of audiences is 60% of the people raise their hand. In other words, they didn't have anyone harvest them. In some cases, it's almost 90%, And I'm thinking of my own testimony. I actually had my spiritual birthday like 6 days ago or 7 days ago. And
Happy belated birthday, by the way.
thank you. It's a half a century with Christ. So
That's
50
awesome.
years with Christ. But on September 28, 1973, when I became a Christian, I was a student at UCLA, had an apartment in West LA. My brother, who had been doing the gardening in my life, came up to my apartment to talk to me more about Christ. And I told him, Mark, you don't have to tell me any more about Jesus. I've already decided I want to become a Christian. In other words, I harvested myself. Now I did say a prayer there because I thought that's what was appropriate. So I bowed my head and I prayed this prayer, similar, I guess, to the sinner's prayer. And then I remember asking him, I looked up, did I do it right? Oh, yeah, he was thrilled, obviously. But I this is the way it was I think for most Christians. They didn't come forward at an altar call. They didn't pray with somebody to receive Christ. They either were raised Christians or they weren't a Christian and now they are, and they have no recollection of that crossing over. So there's no spiritual birthday that they're aware of, or they have a kind of awareness of when that happened, but they were by themselves,
Right.
and they realize that now's the time. I'm a Christian, I believe, or something to that effect. And this is the majority. This is what stunned me, Gregory, that there was a majority of people like this. And so what this has encouraged me in, especially with regards to street smarts, so this is an intuition I had about it, and the concept of gardening is built in to both the earlier tactics book and expanded on in Street Smarts. I have a whole chapter just addressing the gardening issue. Harvester or gardener? That's the question. And I advanced that. But it wasn't until just a month ago when I started to take these polls that I realized how many people were not saved after a fashion in the kind of way that we think is appropriate and the way that we measure ourselves by. How many people did I pray with to receive Christ last year, or in this event, or this crusade, or ever? And the paucity of the numbers for many people is a means of great anxiety for them, even guilt, because they haven't prayed with anyone to receive Christ, okay? So just for the record, I have not prayed with anybody to receive Christ in over 30 years. I know people think, what a loser, right? But I have never been as effective for the cause of Christ as I have been in the last 30 years because I realized that really what I am is a gardener. Just last week, I was at Transylvania University. Yes, there is such a thing in Kentucky. And I was in Lexington. I was at University of Kentucky, also gave separate talks, and Indiana University. Okay, so that was my 92nd or 93rd university that I've spoken at. And I realized when I speak at these universities, I'm not having altar calls. In fact, I tell them before I even start. It's my opening comments. I introduce myself, say a little bit about, 50 years ago now, deciding to follow Jesus because I thought the smart money was on him. And then I tell him, I'm not here to convert you tonight. I just want to kind of annoy you in a good way. I want to get you thinking is what I say. Now, the way I characterize this, and you know this, Gregory, from the tactics book, I'm just trying to put a stone in their shoe. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get them thinking, And if I can get them thinking, if I can have them walk out of that auditorium with something going on in their head that they had not considered before about their challenge of Christianity, on the one hand, or maybe a weakness or a flaw in their own view that I've helped reveal with my talk or whatever it is, then I'm happy. Okay, now that's in a public situation where I'm giving a talk. I have the same goal when I talk on an individual basis, and the goal is not to convert them. I don't have any expectation of that.
Right.
I would just want to give them something to think about. I want to put that annoying little stone in their shoe, because when people think, and even your own viewers, listeners can reflect for themselves on this, and you can think of your own life, Gregory. I don't recall if we talked about your own testimony, but most people who became a Christian sometime they don't always remember being Christian, like in a Christian home, but they became a Christian at some time. They know that there was a season in their life of gardening. There was a period of time where they were considering and thinking about it and tossing the ideas around and asking questions, getting into arguments, pushing back from the table, coming back to the table. That's the way I was. And then finally, making a crossing over somehow, maybe not even making the conscious decision.
Right.
I have a guy in my staff, John Noyes, and John was an atheist, and now he's a Christian apologist, public speaker for me. He has no spiritual birthday. He doesn't remember when he became a Christian. He just knows that he wasn't, and then he was, as he experienced gardening in his life. And it turns out that John Noyes was in my garden when he was an atheist, okay? And, of course, you know J. Warner Wallace, and many people who follow apologetics certainly know the famous cold case detective who was an atheist who applied his tremendous skills as a detective to the Gospels and came to the conclusion that these were reliable eyewitness testimonies. He came to the conclusion Jesus actually did rise from the dead, and then he became a follower of Christ himself and wrote the best-selling book, Cold Case Christianity, which just came out in its 10th anniversary edition. I don't know if you've seen that yet, but it's
I have,
new and improved. You probably bought it. I got a copy too, but I got mine for free because the publisher sent me one. But the point is, though, he's great, and he's making a huge impact now. But, and here's what a lot of people don't know about J. Warner Wallace, he was actually also in my garden when he was an atheist. He was listening to my show.
He was calling into your show as well, as I recall, right?
Pardon me?
Was he also calling into your show back in those days?
You know what? I should ask him. I'm not sure if he was, but anyway, he was listening regularly. And the way he gives his own testimony about this is that he said, finally I heard somebody, because he thought Christians were stupid, basically, and then someone challenged him that Jesus was the smartest man who ever lived. So he said, yeah, really? Okay, I'm going to buy a Bible. And then he got a Bible, like $4 he paid for it. And as he's going through the Bible and then applying his kind of detective test to the documents there, particularly the Gospels, he's also listening to the show. And he says, this is the first time I heard somebody that was, reasonably intelligent who was a Christian. Because he had a lot of cop friends who were Christians, but they couldn't say anything in support of their own convictions. And so he wasn't impressed, all right, so what? And because he's a smart guy, and he wasn't going to be persuaded by somebody who had no reasons and no rationale for it. But when he started listening to the show, he said that was the first time he'd heard a Christian that sounded like he knew a few things and that he was thoughtful about his convictions. And so that was a regular thing for him. And after he became a Christian, then we became friends. And we have been for a long time now. But I didn't know until probably 6 or 7 years ago that he was in my garden. Or some of your listeners may know Abdu Murray, who was a Muslim, who was an attorney in Detroit and then became a Christian, then became an apologist and has his own organization, written a number of books. But Abdu was also in my garden. Now, I say that not to wave my own flag or something like that, but I want people to see that it's possible to have a really powerful impact for the kingdom, even though you're not praying with people to receive Christ. Because I didn't pray with J. Warner Wallace or Abdu Murray or John Noyes. John Noyes didn't pray with anybody.
Right.
Actually, I don't know if any of those guys prayed with anybody. What I do know is they were in my garden, and somehow or another, somebody else, after a fashion, harvested my crop, Get out of my garden. No, Jesus said in John chapter 4, the one who reaps and the one who sows, they rejoice together. So this is a team effort. And I really want to instill that in people's minds, because I think there is a lot of guilt associated with evangelism. And in Street Smarts, I'm just trying to give tools for Chris, even though it's like Street Smarts, I'm shifting my metaphors here. I'm trying to get people into the garden and their gardening tools there so that they can begin to make an impact on people in small ways. Remember, Paul said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God caused the increase. And that's what Street Smarts is all about.
Yeah. And I think that's fascinating. I think throughout the book, there were so many things that I think were very encouraging. I mean, on the opening page of the book, you say, as you mentioned at the beginning of this interview, that Christians don't witness enough because they're scared, and they're scared for good reason. And I think there's almost a relief in seeing that, feeling like, oh, okay, like this guy's telling it like it is.
Yeah, I was hoping that would be the effect in that opening chapter. You're right. In fact, I think my opening line is, I'm going to look it up right now because I think it's so important. Okay, I have a confession to make. Evangelism is hard for me. That's the opening line.
Yeah.
And, I want to create that effect with people. They look at me and they say, well, look at what you do and all that other stuff. And evangelism's hard? Yeah. So don't feel bad that it's hard for you. But that can be overcome with the right training, input, and you can get street smarts, and it'll be a lot easier for you when you do. That's kind of the idea there.
Yeah, and I think that's so helpful to people to not have this sometimes possibly unreasonable goal of, I guess, getting converts, and that being the thing. And if I'm not getting converts every time I'm going out, then somehow I'm failing at this. Yeah,
swinging for the fences, trying to hit home runs and stuff like that. And
instead of just getting up to bat.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's my point. I mean, obviously reflecting from tactics, I say in the tactics book, I said, you don't have to swing for the fences. You don't even have to get on base. I just want you to get into the batter's box, up to bat, as you put it. Yeah. And the tactical game plan that I expand on in Street Smarts will help you to do that. And by the way, Street Smarts is like the third step of the tactical game plan outlined in the tactics book on steroids. But you don't need to have read tactics in order to use Street Smarts, because I review the whole gardening concept. I review the game plan itself so people know exactly how this works, and a number of other things that frankly are not in the tactics book. And then I go into all of these areas and show how the tactical approach unfolds when you see the flaws that I'm able to help the Christian, the reader, see. And not only that, the questions that you can use in dialogue to expose the flaws. So this is key. The subtitle, Street Smarts, of course, is using questions to answer Christianity's toughest challenges. And the questions are what keep the Christian safe, and they allow the Christian to maneuver in a way that's friendly, genial, easy, but keeps them in the driver's seat of the conversation, because the questions direct the conversation in a particular way. Yeah. Just like now, I mean, you're asking me the questions and you're directing the conversation, but I'm doing all the work here.
Right.
But
it's
you're
a lot
in
easier
control
for
of
me
the conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I noticed you've also got a lot of those example dialogues in Street Smarts that really walk people through how these things might play out. So they're getting a lot of really helpful real-world examples. Something in Street Smarts that I wanted to mention, I've been studying your work for a while. I've been following a lot of other apologists like J. Warner Wallace, and of course, everything back from C.S. Lewis and all over. But it was really the first time that I had read something along these lines, because you mentioned a lot the parable of the sower, which for Christians who are watching, if you're familiar with that parable that Jesus spoke of in the Gospels, the short version is he was saying that different people are akin to different types of ground. And so if somebody is scattering seed, you have some people who are hard ground, meaning they're hard-hearted, and the word of God is really not going to penetrate into them. It's not going to take root. They're not going to really receive this well. And some people are good ground. There's a lot more to that parable, but essentially there are people who are good soil, that they're going to hear the word of God. It's going to take root in them, and they are going to produce fruit, or you're going to see the results of them accepting that. Right. I think you're the first person that I've known who really put forward that we can till that ground. We can actually affect that situation. I think a lot of people read that and think Jesus is just saying this is the way people are, and that's the way it is, rather than we can actually do some gardening and help make those people good ground, ready for receiving the message of Christ.
No, that's a great observation. I saw something in that parable. I talk about it in the book that I had not seen before. And before I wrote this, as I'm putting this stuff together, I went back to the parable, and I noticed something that jumped out at me. It's sitting right there. I don't know why I didn't see it for how many times I'd read it over the years. But on the first ground, that's the road. The seed falls on the road, and the birds carry it away. So that's the way he gave the parable to the people. Now, when he's in private with the disciples, he's explaining what that means. And, of course, our response is much like you just suggested, like hard-headed people, they're not listening, so the message just bounces off their hard heads. But that actually is not the way Jesus characterized it when he explained it. And he said that the seed that has fallen on the road is the word of the kingdom given to the people. And here's what I missed all those other times I read it, who did not understand what had been sown in their hearts. It didn't bounce off. It went in, but it didn't stay. And the reason it didn't stay and became vulnerable to the devil taking away, the birds, the devil, is that they didn't get it. It didn't make sense to them. And I realized that we are probably, in a lot of our conversations with people, we are not speaking their language. And I don't mean we have to be hip and cool. And I mean, I'm 73 years old, for crying out loud. I'm not going to, I'm not going to look at you. See, you're hip and cool. I'm not, okay?
I'm closer behind you than you might think.
Pardon me?
I said I'm closer behind you than you might think.
So, but that we communicate in a way that people will understand. So that entails, one, I think, dodging a lot of religious language that is meaningless to them. It's just a lot of spiritual noise to them. Receive Jesus as Lord and Savior, what does that mean? So finding a different way to say it that doesn't sound like a, here's what I usually, it depends what church I'm in. If I'm in a Lutheran church, I say it doesn't sound like a Baptist. If I'm in a Baptist church, I say it doesn't sound like a Lutheran or a Pentecostal or something like that, But the point is we want to sound like ordinary folk and find synonyms for the words to add more meaning to them. I don't talk about faith. I talk about trust. I don't talk about Jesus as Savior. I talk about the rescuer. Okay, so now, of course, those words mean essentially the same thing, but they're so much more fresh to people's ears that it has a bigger impact. They begin to understand what we're talking about. And then if we can take the message that Jesus brought and the worldview that he advanced, the understanding of reality the way God sees it, the reality according to God, and that would be Jesus, of course, and then help speak in a way that people can see the broader picture. Well, this then is speaking so that they understand it. And by the way, that's the fourth ground. Jesus, he revisits that language in the fourth ground, and he says that one who hears and understands it, he's the one who bears fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold. So that's what I want. That's what I want for my Christian brothers and sisters. I want them to bear fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold. And the way to do that is to communicate in a way that people understand. If they don't understand it, they can't make any sense out of it. And this is part of the point of street smart. It's getting into the street. It's not expecting street, in a certain sense, following the metaphor, street people to come into our culture, into the church. Inviting them to church is fine, and that obviously transforms a lot of lives. But we want to go where they're at, and that's what Jesus did. Jesus went into the street. And why did he tell parables? Because that's the way you communicate with the people in the street of his time. All right. And so we're following after that tradition with street smarts.
Yeah. I think we also saw that in Paul's ministry when he was willing to talk to Greeks as they, would understand things. He talked to the Jewish people as they would understand things based on their culture. And I think it's important for us to do that in our own so that message can be best received.
Yeah, he said, I became a Jew to the Jew. I wasn't under the law, but I became that kind of person for the Jew. To the Gentile, I became like a Gentile. Now, he didn't adopt their ethics, but he adopted their social customs as much as he could and social manner as much as he could so that he could communicate as effectively as possible.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious because, with tactics and now with street smarts, there's a lot of really helpful methodology and philosophy towards these things for reaching people where they are
Yeah.
and really communicating things as they are best going to understand them. That's why I said when I first listened to you speak on tactics and when I got the book, that's why it was life-changing for me, was because I was still, I'm a full-time musician. And I would get done with these gigs, at midnight or 1 a.m., and somebody would come up and start some conversation that would just go to a spiritual nature. And then they're like, so why do you believe what you believe? And oh man. So I'm going through the cosmological argument. I'm talking about original sin and the fall of mankind. And that's why our world's broken. And that's why we needed, to be reconciled with God. And the Old Testament was kind of like the law was a placeholder, really, but we were being shown it wasn't working. And then here's why Jesus had to come, and he offers this gift that will make us right with God again. And, going through the whole thing, and it would, it'd take me an hour to get through it. And I'm like, man, I want to go home.
You're the talker and he's the listener. So these are preacher-monies kind of thing. And those are useful, but there is a liability there. And if you think about the dynamic that you just described, it's much more effective if you can have a back and forth conversation.
Yes.
And also, when you do that, Gregory, you are actually putting yourself at risk because you're making these claims and laying these things on the table. And if the other fella or gal is not like warming up to it, and they tend to be a little hostile to the ideas at least, they're going to be pushing back and finding difficulties that they have with what you have to say. So now you got more objections to field, all right? So that's part of the liability there of that kind of approach. That's different from the street smarts approach, okay? The street smarts approach is dialogical. So there's back and forth and back and forth. And the basic game plan has 3 steps. The first step, and this is I go into a lot of detail, obviously, in the tactics book on this, but I do revisit it in a summary form in a whole chapter called the game plan in Street Smarts. And the first step is just to gather information. So if you're at a gig and you finish up your thing and people are just talking and somebody raises some spiritual issue, you want to try to get more information from them. Okay,
right.
And ask more questions of them. The guy says, well, I'm an atheist. Oh, really? What kind of atheist are you? A lot of different kinds of atheists. Some actually don't. I mean, when you talk to them, some say, well, I don't believe there is no God. I just have no belief in a God. This is a little variation. I talk about that in the book. So some of them don't believe in some guy in the sky with a long beard sitting on a throne. Well, I don't believe in that God either. So it's good to find out what exactly do they believe. Somebody says, well, what about the problem of evil? I said, well, what about it? Well, that's a problem for you, isn't it? What's the problem? So I'm just tossing the ball back in their court. I'm wanting them to talk more and kind of get more out there. Now, part of the reason I do this, and this is just the first step, I'm gathering information. I'm asking some form of the question, what do you mean by that? Tell me more, basically, because I have this conviction that if my view is accurate, if it's true, then their contrary view is false. That's pretty straightforward. But if it's false, the more they talk about it, the bigger the hole is that they're digging for themselves.
Right.
And in the process of talking about it, some of these things are going to be made more evident, okay? The next step for me is once I get a clear picture of their view, again, let's just say it's the atheists again, I'm going to ask, okay, what are your reasons for being an atheist? Well, how did you come to that conclusion or whatever? So I'm finding out what their view is and their reasons for it. Notice that's the first 2 steps of 3 steps. 2/3 of the game plan, you're just gathering different types of information and showing an interest in the other person, and then listening as more information is being given. Very, very important. So, and again, it's hard to emphasize how much progress a Christian can make in a conversation without asserting his own view. Listen, if we can help people doubt their view in some way, that means they're going to be open to some alternate view. So if a person begins to doubt the legitimacy of atheism, there's only one other alternative, some form of theism, all right?
Right.
And so that moves them closer in our direction. And that's all I'm after. Remember, we're gardening here. So once we get the clear picture on what their view is and maybe why they hold it, then we want to know, and by the way, when they tell why, their reasons why, chances are there's going to be more ambiguities in what they say, so we're going to fall back on the first question. Oh, wait, I don't understand that particular point. Help me out here. Somebody asked a question, is the Bible reliable?
What do you
Well,
mean
that
by
seems
that?
pretty straightforward. What do you mean by reliable? They could mean historically reliable. They could mean, are the texts transmitted down through time in a reliable way, or have they been corrupted? They could be meaning, is the content reliable? Can I trust the claims it makes about God, whether it's inspired or not? So these are different ways that people might mean that. I don't know until I ask. So I'm going to ask specifically, when you say reliable, what exactly do you have in mind? And then I just have to wait for them to tell me. And then once I know what their issue is, then I'm going to construct a series of questions to help lead them in that direction. For example, say a person says, "Well, no, I don't believe the Bible's inspired by God. There's too many contradictions and blah blah blah." Now, I'm not going down that road, and the reason is, anytime you try to answer one contradiction, they're going to come up with allegedly another. So, I don't. For the sake of my conversation with the non-Christian, I am not going to make the case that the Bible is the inspired Word of God without contradiction. I don't need to do that. The early church didn't have a New Testament like that. They had something else. They had a testimony about Jesus, which they shared, and that's what made the difference. And so, so my question is, I'm going to ask this question of the person who's challenging the authority of the divinely inspired nature of the Bible. Here's a question: do you have any books in your library? Sure, I do. Are those any? Do they tell you the truth about anything? Yeah, of course they do. Are any of your books inspired by God? No, are you kidding me? So a book doesn't have to be inspired by God to tell you the truth about something, right?
Right.
Of course. Now, wow, that's a huge piece, right? That's a huge piece on the table. Now, I want you to notice something else. Because I'm asking these questions, they're kind of helping me build the case that you don't have to have an inspired text in order to know the truth in order to have that text communicate truth about something important. Now, Of course, I believe it's inspired, but I don't have to convince them of that. All I have to do is disabuse them of the idea that the Bible has to be inspired by God to tell me true things about God. That's set aside. Okay, now I can go back and I can take a little different tack. Notice it was just a little set of questions that accomplished a particular goal. Okay, and in fact, that little conversation is in Street Smarts. All right. Let me give you another example, and this is I'll give you two actually. This next one's in the book as well, and I'm talking here with an atheist who says there's no evidence for God. I say, okay, let me ask you a few questions. Is that all right? Sure. Yeah, go ahead. The first ones are pretty simple. All right, just play along with me. Okay. Do you think things exist? Yeah.
Of course.
Okay. So do I. We all agree things exist. Okay, second question. Now, this is a little more important. Of all the things that exist, have they always existed, or did they come into existence at some time in the past? Okay. Now we're talking about the origin of the universe stuff, Big Bang cosmology or whatever. And pretty much everybody believes in the Big Bang, except for some Christians who are uncomfortable with that. That's all right. Don't worry about that, because since everybody who's not a Christian believes in the Big Bang, that means we both believe the same thing, and that is that the universe had a beginning. Okay? The universe isn't eternal. The universe had a beginning. Okay, gotcha. So now I say I agree with you on that. I believe the universe had a beginning too. Now, here's the third question, most important. What caused the beginning of the universe? What caused the universe to come into existence? And then I say, well, there's only two options, just to make it simple. Either something or nothing, right? Something or nothing. So what do you think? Now it's back in their court. Now, what are they going to say? Now, they're the atheists, right? They don't want to say something because that's something outside of the material universe, right? Okay. And that means the materialism is dead. And also, this something would have to be really smart and really powerful and personal to start the chain of events that creates the universe. They don't want to go there. But what's the only option left to them? That nothing caused everything for no reason with no purpose. Okay, well, maybe that's possible, but is it the odds-on favorite? That's the point I'm making here. Does that make the most sense? Where do we see things popping up into existence out of nothing for no cause with no purpose? It just doesn't happen. Oh, some people want to fuss about the quantum level. I said, yeah, well, we're not talking about quantum stuff. We're talking about the whole universe, the biggest thing ever, okay? What makes the most sense? Now, notice something else about that, Gregory. What I did, because I'm asking those preliminary questions, I'm asking, once again, for help enlisting the other person as an ally. If I started saying, and of course you recognize this right away as the Kalam cosmological argument, and the very specific kind of argument for God's existence, but I'm not calling it fancy names. You don't even need to know the fancy names. Big Bang needs a Big Banger. That's the point we're making here, right? So I could say, well, things exist, and things didn't always exist. They came into being, and that requires a cause, and on and on. Now, if every time I say this, though, with a challenger, they're going to say, wait a minute, maybe we're butterflies dreaming or something. Maybe the universe is eternal, blah, 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 blah. Their impulse is to want to contradict me. And so what happens? Now I'm getting all this confrontation, this contradiction. We're not getting anywhere. So instead, I ask them the question for them to put that piece on the table. And when they put the piece on the table, they're not going to take it off the table. They're not going to take exception with it because they put it there. Okay? So I put all those pieces there. And then, to use a musical term, I have the mic drop moment. Okay, what caused it? Something or nothing. Now, it's not. I'm not trying to make the person look silly, but I'm just trying to help them. Okay, here's where you're at. There's no way out of this. Now what? What's the odds-on favorite? And then I leave it there. I'm not going to ask for, okay, you want to pray to receive Christ? No, I just want them to think about that. And I might never talk to them again. I did my little gardening. God's in charge of that particular individual. Maybe another time I will talk to him. But at least I've made a point that belief in God is not just reasonable, but it seems to me to be the most reasonable option of the two options that we have regarding the origin of the universe. Okay, so there's a kind of a thumbnail sketch of that street smarts strategy in play, given atheism, and one of the reasons I think atheism is false, that the universe had a beginning. Now, of course, all of this detail, the backstory and the dialogue is in the Street Smarts book, and that's an example of how I deal with everything. But once you start doing this, Gregory, you get the, I think people get the rhythm of this, and as they read through the book, they start doing this, they're going to get the rhythm of it. Now, I do have a section in there on Bible problems, like, for example, alleged genocide. Mm-hmm. What about all the genocide in the Bible? Your God is an evil God. Well, Of course, I could ask them the question, where are you getting your moral standard to judge God by? You think this is wrong. Tell me what you mean by that. Where's this standard coming from? That's one line of thinking, especially with an atheist. Because in atheism, you don't have any moral standards that are inherent to the universe. You can make it up as you go along if you want. But there's no moral standards that you can judge by. That's one problem. But I just thought of something the other day. It's not in the book, but it just came to me because I think about these things, and that's the pattern that you get into, I think, when you learn how street smarts works. And so the question is, genocide in the Bible, right? So what is genocide? So that's the first question I'd ask them. That's a what do you mean by that question? What is genocide? Well, genocide is when, one group of people kill a whole bunch of other people. Okay, that's genocide. So like when the Germans killed a bunch of Jews, right, that's genocide. Yeah, that's genocide. What the Germans did was wrong, right? Yeah, that was terrible. That was genocide. What about when the Allied soldiers killed lots of Germans who had been killing Jews? Is that genocide? Now, I think that's going to give them pause because Wait, that's different, right?
Right.
Those are the good guys killing the bad guys. But they did kill a lot of Germans, millions of them. More Germans were killed than Jews were killed in that conflagration, okay? So now they got to think about it. That wasn't genocide when the Germans did it. Why not? You still got a group of people killing a bunch of other people. Well, because they were doing it for a good reason. They were stopping the bad people from killing the Jews. And so in other words, what the Allied soldiers did to the Germans, even though they killed a lot of them, millions of them, that was not genocide. What they did was actually good. Am I hearing you right? And they're going to affirm that. Okay, great. So, and now this is mic drop moment. So in other words, genocide isn't just killing lots of people.
Right.
Genocide is killing lots of people for the wrong reason. All right. I mean, that seems like a pretty straightforward conclusion that we draw from that little line of questioning. Again, that part is not in the book, but what is in the book is the next line of questioning. And that has to do with the question of whether God had a good reason to kill lots of people in certain instances, very isolated instances, in the Old Testament. And the answer to that is going to be yes, because of what these people were guilty of doing, especially to children. Child sacrifice, for example. Right. And so, so I have another series of questions related to that. But I just thought of this other definition of genocide series of questions on my own just a couple of weeks ago that will be a more appropriate kind of lead-in to what I have in the book. I just wish I would have thought about this 6 months ago before I finished the
Funny how that happens,
maybe a year ago it'd be more like it. But you can see how that works.
Yeah. Well, I think something that is so beneficial from this approach is not just the time-saving aspect of, like I talked about, of I don't have to spend an hour talking to somebody. I can think about what's going to make the most impact in the shortest amount of time. And it's not just that you're not making yourself too vulnerable by putting your own claims out there to be kind of dissected by the person you're talking to. You're keeping yourself safe, as you mentioned, but that's right. A benefit as well. But I think something really huge about this is that you're getting to the core issue of what that person is really struggling with when it comes to a faith issue or something that has to do with a spiritual element of your conversation. Because sometimes when people say like, oh, so you believe the Bible and all of it, they're not really questioning the validity of the Bible. They might have some more emotional issue with something. Yeah. And by asking these questions, you really can get to the thing that they're most needing to hear. You're really serving them the best by asking these questions and going through this process. And that's what I think is so great about this strategy.
What you're getting at is the story behind the story, so to speak.
Right.
The story behind the story, so to speak, behind the question, and that's really important as well. And a lot of time in the process, you're going to uncover something that's more pressing. An obvious example is when you make the case against abortion on demand. And that case can be made, and I do in the book very clearly with a series of questions, actually 2 separate chapters on the abortion issue because there's a lot of different challenges from different directions. But then you might get the pushback, well, what about with rape? Now, a lot of times people aren't asking, in a certain sense, the academic question about whether you have a mind related to this and you can give a thoughtful answer in a way that's consistent with the pro-life position. They're asking whether you have a heart,
Right.
and sometimes the person asking has been a victim of rape, all right? And if you blow right past that and just start giving your answer in light of the pro-life position, it's going to miss the question behind the question, the story behind the story, whatever. And this is why when someone raises the question of rape, it's a good idea to gently ask, is that something that's happened in your life or in the life of somebody that's been close to you? Is that why you're asking this question? And now that doesn't change the moral equation, but it does help you to it demonstrates that you care about the person who's struggling
Right.
with this. I mean, the simple answer is the unborn child shouldn't pay with his life for the crime of his father. All right. But if we just toss that out, then who's being left out? The mother's being left out in this equation, or it appears to be.
Right.
And so this is where, as you pointed out, this getting behind the issue a little bit really helps us to be sensitive to that individual. And that's all part of the process. Paul says in Colossians 4 that we are to season our words with salt so that we know how to respond to each person. And that's an example of that, I think.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, in the time that we have left, I did want to do a little bit of a role play, based
right.
upon this methodology. And I thought, what better topic than if anybody watched my video on my time at CIA, that Greg and I kind of did this little sparring match once before with the roles reversed. So this time I figured I would take the opposing viewpoint and see how we can get through the issue of the moral argument for the existence of God.
Okay. All right.
So if you had somebody who approached you and said, this is, I think your viewpoint is ridiculous because of how science has proven evolution to be a true fact. It's there's no way that your viewpoint is anything other than just a bunch of fairy tales.
Okay, I thought you were going to go on the moral argument side, but you want to go on the science side. No, I'll follow your. So
you'll take the moral argument.
So when you say evolution, you mean like the neo-Darwinian model? Is that what you're referring to, or just
change over time has eventually gotten us from single-celled organisms into the beings we are now. Okay. So what you consider to be objective morality, to found your belief in God, is really just an illusion.
Oh, okay. So now I'm a little confused. I'm in role play here, just so you know.
Okay.
I'm a little confused. At first, it sounded like you're saying since evolution is true beyond, in the Darwinian sense, I guess the neo-Darwinian synthesis, genetic mutations, natural selection explains all the variety that we have in the world. Then, therefore, Christian theism is false. And then it's not like you switch to say it is Darwinian evolution that produces our belief about morality, and therefore your moral viewpoint, of objective moral viewpoint, is false. So I'm not sure which one you're pursuing here.
I
which
just feel
one
like
do you want to start with?
Yeah, from top to bottom, whether it's belief in theism or objective morality, whatever that may be. I just feel like evolution proves it all.
Are you? Do you study? Have you studied this Darwinian thing a lot? I'm just curious.
Not a lot, but I know enough to know that there's scientific consensus that all the most learned minds in science believe in evolution, and so I tend to think that they can't all be wrong, and that's what most of them believe. So it seems like that's the odds-on favor.
The reason I ask is just there's been a big shift in the scientific consensus, and what they all agree in is some kind of materialistic process. But the Darwinian model has been under scrutiny for a long time, just simply because it has not been shown to accomplish the task that it allegedly accomplishes, that to produce this kind of variation, and especially on a biochemical level, those kinds of things. So I'm just wondering how much you've been studying, because there actually is a lot of change in the culture right now about that, or I should say in the scientific discipline. They don't deny that some materialistic process has produced it, but they are raising the question about Darwinian the adequacy of Darwinism to accomplish that. But let's just set that aside for a moment. And let's just say you're right, that Darwinism gives us a belief in morality which doesn't exist, right? In an objective sense.
Yeah, it's an illusion.
So there is no law out there. It is just Darwinism that has taught us to believe, has, in a certain sense, tricked us into believing that morality is real, so that then will help us get our genes in the next generation. Is that the view you're promoting? Okay.
Yeah, we can see that it has societal benefits, but there's nothing really behind it beyond just that's how we've evolved to act and think that's going to produce the best results in society.
Right. Okay. So in other words, Darwinian evolution has tricked you and me into believing something false about the world, and that false thing is morality.
Well, I mean, I feel like we have some good evidence that it's been working, so I don't know that I would call it false.
Okay. Well, here's the difference. Either rape is wrong in itself, that's objective morality, or we believe rape is wrong, or some other. Actually, it's kind of odd to think about how rape being wrong would not benefit the evolutionary process. So let's just say genocide is wrong, or whatever, murder is wrong, or something like that. So to help us survive better as a species.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not actually wrong in the ultimate, absolute, objective sense. Correct?
I mean,
can biology make an act wrong in itself?
No, it can just convince us that it is.
Convince us. Thank you. That's great. So it has convinced us to believe an act is wrong in itself when the act is not wrong in itself. So in other words, evolution has convinced us to believe something false, objective morality.
I don't know that I would concede that it is making us believe something false. It's making us believe something that may or may not be false, but is beneficial.
Well, I thought your whole point was evolution has created a circumstance to show that our beliefs about morality are not accurate. Christians believe in objective morality, but evolution has shown that that's not really the case. It's just a trick of evolution. That's why we believe in it. So either there is objective morality or there isn't. It sounded to me, Gregory, like what you're offering is an alternative explanation to our view of objective morality that God gives us. That's just a trick of evolution. So there is no objective morality. If you think there is objective morality, I have some more questions, but it sounded to me like you're saying evolution is a replacement theory for God. We have relativistic morality, but we believe it's objective because evolution has caused that to happen through the process of evolution.
I'd agree with that.
Okay, good. So I'm just trying to put it in the simplest terms. Evolution has caused us to believe something false about morality.
Something potentially false.
Yeah. All right. It sounds like you're fudging a little bit, but I'll just go with that for the moment. Okay.
Which, for the role play,
because if it's not potentially false,
yeah.
it could be objectively true, and it's objectively true, then we have to talk about where does that come from, this transcendent objective morality. And you don't want to go there, I don't think, because you're an atheist from what I understand. Okay, so I get it. I get the whole thing. But now the question becomes, if Darwinian evolution can cause us to believe something that's objectively false, in this case morality, what other things might evolution have caused us to believe that's actually objectively false?
I guess we wouldn't have a way of knowing.
Oh, that's really good. Well, then how do we know that evolution itself is actually true when evolution doesn't choose for truth, but just for survivability? Okay, there's the mic drop. Okay. And
Right.
This is the point here. And by the way, that's a point I develop in Street Smarts because that's a huge weakness. If you're going to argue that morality is something that evolution has created, which, I mean, that's a standard atheistic response regarding morality. We can be good without God. Okay, and there's a whole chapter on that in the book. But that means evolution has caused us to believe something false about the world for its benefit. So, okay, well then, how are we going to trust our mental capabilities that evolved by chance to begin with to give us true information about the world? And if we can't trust it to do it because we're saying that it's cheated us in one area, morality, maybe it's cheated us in other areas too. Because once again, evolution does not choose for truth. It chooses for reproducibility. I mean, more strictly, it's the selfish gene kind of stuff, and not just survival of the species. It doesn't care about species. It doesn't even know what a species is, for goodness sake.
Right.
So
exactly.
This is a huge problem for the Darwinian model. Even if the Darwinian model is true, which I asked some questions about it. And the fact is, it's really under scrutiny now, not by the Richard Dawkins of the world, the popular writers, but by the people who are at the top of the enterprise. They're looking hard at it because it just doesn't work.
Thomas Nagel's book on that was very good.
Say again?
I said Thomas Nagel's book on that was quite good.
Yes, that's right. Well, it's not adequate. He's and I have it here, Nagel's book, Mind and Cosmos. It's in the back there somewhere. But how the neo-Darwinian, the subtitle is how something like the materialistic neo-Darwinian conception of the universe is almost certainly false. Right. And he's just saying it's not adequate. It's just not adequate to account for everything, including consciousness, which is one of his specialties. But there's not just people like Nagel, but a whole bunch of others who are just looking at the hard science. They're saying, look at it. It does not add up. When you look, the devil's in the details, right? Not in the stories. You can tell all these stories you want, wave the wand. But so that is a problem there. But even if we just concede, okay, great, then all right, we won't go there. We'll just grant you the Darwinian model. But this creates another problem, and that is the problem of knowledge. If a Darwinian process is responsible for our beliefs, which in the case of morality turn out to be false by our assessment, what other false beliefs might the Darwinian process be created in our mind? I don't even know how Darwinism can create beliefs. That's another thing, Beliefs are propositional, they're not chemistry. But that's another issue entirely.
Yeah.
Well played there, Gregory. Too bad for you. Sorry.
Thanks. And I do agree that my approach there was a little wishy-washy, but I was intentionally kind of playing some of the same comments that I've gotten as pushback. But so I want to follow up here just to say, for anybody watching, go pick up a copy of Street Smarts. It's a fantastic book that will instruct you well on how to navigate these same kinds of issues and have these types of conversations that will result in some beneficial things for the kingdom. And so, Greg, thank you so much for your ministry and all that you're doing through Stand to Reason. And thanks again for taking the time to be here on the program. And is there anything you'd like to say in closing as we wrap up?
The only thing you mentioned Stand to Reason. Our website is STR for Stand to Reason, str.org. Very simple. And my podcast is on there, and other things I've written. And we've got a team of like 5 different content providers. We've been providing content for 30 years now. We just had our 30th anniversary. Yay. And we have, thank you, we got thousands and thousands and thousands of things written, videos, training materials, blogs, all kinds of stuff, podcasts that they can find at str.org. You can get the book at Amazon or str.org. Get the tactics book if you want. The best 1-2 punch is the 2 books, Tactics first, because there's a lot of stuff in Tactics that is not in Street Smarts. Then you get Street Smarts, and then you add the third step of Tactics on steroids, basically, and then you get all the content regarding all of these issues that people struggle with when they're challenged by it. So that would be my suggestion, str.org, and take a look at the book. And I trust it'll make a big difference in their lives as it has the concepts in my own life as I engage people for Christ.
Excellent. I'll make sure and leave a link to str.org in the comments for this video.
Sounds good.
And thanks once again, Greg. God bless you and your ministry. Hope you have a wonderful day, my friend.
You too, buddy.